Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're watching. Welcome to this edition of the Scott Ritter Show. Um, when we discuss issues like the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, there's a lot of effort spent on the conflict itself and also reflecting on the geopolitical ramifications of this conflict in a European context or transatlantic context. We've even discussed the impact this has on China and Asia. But there's another area of the world where the ripple effects of the Ukrainian-Russian conflict can be felt, and that is the Middle East. And so today, I think we're going to dive into that, and there's no one better to have as a guest on the show than Evgeny Satanovsky, an esteemed professor. I believe he's the founder and the president of the Middle East Institute, an orientalist, an advisor to Russian government, and just the right guy to have for the show. So I want to thank you very much for coming on today, agreeing to talk. Why don't we just start straight off? Everybody's been talking about the Chinese diplomatic coup in the Middle East and bringing Iran and Saudi Arabia together. But there isn't as much talk about what I think is as equally an important diplomatic achievement, and that's Russia's role in bringing Syria together with Saudi Arabia and bridging this. Could you discuss that briefly for the audience, please?
Никаких проблем.
Absolutely, no problem. I'm really glad to welcome all of you, and I'm really to see everybody who is today online. It's been a while when I had the chance to speak for the Canadian and American audience. There were times when I had to communicate with them more frequently. If we start with Syria, let's discuss Syria. There is no coup at all, Scott, you know. The time of America is running out, and the time of France and England is going to be over in this region. But it starts to be time of China there. It's okay. Why something should be perennial, eternal? For now, China takes the niche which it has been taken some 200 years ago, when Chinese economy was one-fourth of the global economy, and it was absolutely okay. The American economy 200 years ago was not equal to the Chinese ones, and without speaking about the European. Who said that it wouldn't affect politics? Okay, if in the beginning of 15th century John Hay Admiral reached Africa with their Chinese ships and fleets which are absolutely unparalleled in Europe. And then there was a choice of Chinese emperor just to stop being a global power. They did it, they stopped being that, and then after 500 years they almost ceased to exist as a state at all. But now the history is going backwards, and now Chinese are entering and have entered the diplomatic relations, if we may call it like that, as a middleman, as a big intermediary, which can extinguish those conflicts which were blowing up in the region. And the Chinese, they are big peacekeepers. They are interested in trade. They are interested in sales of their goods. They are interested in receiving energy and raw materials in China, where they are short of. For that, they need trade routes, and Chinese don't need big, middle, or small wars on those trade routes. And this is the whole secret of this activity as a middleman between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and all those happenings which we evidence in Syria, coming back to the Arab League, in Russia. And President Putin has a similar idea. They try to suppress revolutions and wars as they can. the overthrows in Venezuela, Belarus, and Syria failed because they are dangerous. Probably for the State Department, they could be interesting and beneficial in terms of supporting the democracy and any other things, which can sound good, but they are very bloody activities, you know. But for the real world and for normal people, this all ends up very badly. So, meanwhile, what we have a big conflict, one big conflict within which probably the Middle East could be a big war. It's between Israel and Iran. And I have absolutely no doubt that both China and Russia will do their best to end it up without a war. To what extent it would be in line what the current Prime Minister of Israel wants, or what any American administration would want, I don't know. But somehow Beijing and China, or Beijing and Moscow will act as they do. But let me make a very short comment on what you started to think, because I'm from the Ukraine. My whole family comes from Ukraine. The family of my wife is from Ukraine. For us, for local people, this is a civil war, and it's absolutely no difference for me as regards Russia and Ukraine. There's no difference which would split us and divide us from the the civil war in the States. That was one country which split up into several states. In the case of the United States, the war started immediately, and President Lincoln won, and the United States stayed a uniform state and one country. In our situation here, again, I have to repeat, this is one that used to be one country which split up in 15 states and a few more pieces which didn't join neither of those states. And this is the strategic difference between us. Because for me, Ukraine is my home, and there are graves of my ancestors for 500 years. And once when President Bush and Condoleezza Rice were in Russia, it was 20 years ago, and it happened that I had a chance to meet them as a president of the Russian Jewish Congress, and I told Mrs. Rice that Ukraine and Georgia, these are those 2 points which mean that America is getting ready for a barbecue, not on the Russians' backyard, but just in the dining room. And no one would forget it, no one would ever forgive it, and no one would ever leave it as it is. She looked at me as a silly man, and probably she was right at that time. She used to be a state secretary, but I was just a chief Jew of Russia. And she answered in Russian. She told me, "You didn't live under democracy. You don't understand. Everywhere, everything will be okay." Then I used to talk to her about Iraq. She said, we will come to Iraq. There used to be Saddam Hussein at that time, and the democracy will come with us, and everything will be okay. But we all know what happened afterwards. So America has come to Ukraine. Democracy came to Ukraine. We know what happened. And then, next, what I told you. Sorry, I was distracted that since you mentioned Ukraine, I couldn't but make my small contribution to this topic.
Don't apologize. It's absolutely imperative. And I think we have to respect the fact that, especially Westerners looking on the situation in Ukraine from a distance, we lose sight of the fact of the emotions of this conflict for the people who are involved, and that it is a civil conflict, a civil war, with all the horrors that entails. So thank you very much for providing that insight and that background. It's absolutely essential that we never lose sight of the humanity of this conflict and the inhumanity of asking one people to fight amongst themselves, which is, of course, what a civil war is. But I'd like to get back to the Middle East just because I think that's the topic that we that I had prepared for. I mean, I'd be more than happy to talk Ukraine with you all day long because it's a topic that's not understood by Americans, and it's a personal passion of mine to talk about it. So maybe we can get back to that in a second. But about Syria, I'd just like to deconstruct Syria, the issue of Syria, because Russia is engaged in Syria right now militarily. They have a military presence, and it was essential, I believe, for preserving the government of Bashar al-Assad. That if Russia had not intervened, there would not be an Assad presidency in Syria today. And so Russia, I think, has taken the lead in this, and it's interesting.
There were no Syria at all in that time. There were no Syria then, not only Bashar Assad.
Right, no Syria at all. I agree. But now we have an interesting situation where Russia is taking the lead in bringing Saudi Arabia, for instance, together with Syria. But when I look back, not only was Saudi Arabia on the side of the United States in Syria in promoting an anti-Syrian regime policy, but Saudi Arabia wasn't very friendly with Russia. I think we can go back to the spring of 2020, and I think there was an oil war fought between Russia and Saudi Arabia, a price war where they were, overproducing oil, dropping prices, a struggle for global market share. And yet today we see Russia and Saudi Arabia working together on the oil issue. They have good relations, and Russia is working to bring Saudi Arabia and Syria together. How did we get there in such a short period of time? How did we get from an oil war to peace in a matter of 3 years? Can you explain that to the audience, please? Because it's confusing to some people.
Войны не было.
There were no war. There were some differences, normal differences. There can be in any club. Not everybody has to always agree based on their current interests. Sometimes interests of one country are different and are absolutely opposite to the interests of other country, although strategically they are in line. I was evidencing the very beginning of the process of OPEC Plus establishment. There's a very powerful oil cartel at the moment. And by the way, it's not the only one. There is a gas cartel. There's a structure which we call gas OPEC. And in those structures, each country has its own interests. Every ruler, every governor of those countries has current problems which make them disagree with each other. But what is most important, they can agree, they can come to this agreement. And for the moment, all main oil producers in the world, of course there are states, but the states are on their own, but all main oil producers in the world are able to agree between each other and can settle differences, can sort out problems to the mutual benefit in order to make the oil price not too high and not too low. At the same time, the last thing which is interesting for Moscow and Riyadh, what will be the gasoline price in the states by the elections. It's absolutely doesn't matter for them. What matters is the budget of Russia, budget of Iran, Venezuela, Saudi Arabia. Only the budget is important. If the money is enough to fill out their budgets, this is fine, this is okay. If the price is okay for the consumer, that is excellent. The consumer It's not always America. It could be China, India. The world is very big. In this sense, the United States just lost de facto. They lost the opportunity to influence on oil prices. The Biden administration doesn't understand this. And every time when President Biden or Antony Blinken read a lecture to someone, from the governors of the Middle East to the Saudis to Emirates, on the topic what they should or don't have to do with their volumes on the market, with the oil prices, with human rights, whatever, they kill the American influence by that. And honestly, for me, I absolutely don't care whether this influence will stay or not, because with all my likings to the States, and please believe me, I have much more likings to the States than the vast majority of population in my country. I believe that the policy and the government of the States is a suicide. They lead a suicide policy. President Trump was much better in handling with the Gulf monarchs. He maintained a normal dialogue, probably because he is a man from normal business. Probably he has different approach there, understanding that not everything can be achieved. And he managed to achieve much more from them. The gun contracts, which they are now going over to China. Whom shall we thank for that? Probably President Biden believes that if he came and insulted the host, but he did it several times personally, it would give him some points in this game. I believe this was a great mistake, but finally these are the Americans who decide who's going to be their president and state secretary and what will be the external policy of their country, and that's it. The situation is really simple. The world is now learning how to live without America, without taking into account any interests of America or something. Well, by trying not to quarrel with America, but on the other hand, taking into account the old Arab saying, I heard it first from the Jordan king, it was very long ago. To be an enemy of America is dangerous, but to be a friend of America is twice as dangerous. So this is the situation today. And since it's like that, what can we do about it? This is the situation we live in. We can love it or dislike it. We can try to adapt to it, or we can just keep saying that I don't want to see the world like that. But many people don't want to see the world like that, other than they were young. But what can we do about this?
No, you're absolutely right. Thank you for that. You know, there's you mentioned an Arab saying. There's a Chinese saying, "May you live in interesting times." It's actually a curse, and I think we live in interesting times, so it's problematic. Let's move away from Syria, not totally away from Syria, but talk about another country, and I think this one's very interesting because of the interplay between Russia and the United States in the and this is Turkey. Turkey is a NATO member. Turkey has been an American ally for some time now. Turkey is involved in Syria. Turkish troops have gone to combat against Russian forces in Syria. And yet, Turkish-Russian relations are not bad. The Turkish president speaks frequently with the Russian president. They coordinate on a number of issues, including energy. Turkey is in position with Russian help to create a gas hub to supply Europe with Russian gas. Could you give us some insights into the dynamic that's going on here? Because it's to Americans who operate in a black and white world, you're either with us or you're against us. And we take a look at Russia's interaction with Turkey, and we say on so many areas Turkey appears to be against Russia, and yet they have very good relations with Russia. and it's a dynamic that oftentimes confuses us. How does Russia get away with such a complex relationship with a nation like Turkey?
Turkey is our old historical enemy. We have wars for 13 or 14 times. The whole southern part of European Russia is either ex-Turkey or former Iran, Persia. We began to wage wars when the United States didn't exist at all on the map of the world. We already waged wars when Mayflower arrived to the coast of America. But we got used to each other for those centuries so strongly, and we have in our background more than 400 years of wars. The wars where Turkey lost almost all its territory. But at the same time, we respect each other, we respect them, and they respect us. Yes, this is our ex-enemy, but this is our neighbor. We can't go away from. This is a very simple answer to your question. When I trying to understand what attitude Turkey has to Russia and what attitude they have to the states, the situation is very simple. The vast majority of all Turkish establishment is for America. They support America. The vast majority of Turkish press supports America. But the Turkish population hates America, and Turkish president and his team also hate America. And this is mutual, this is reciprocal, because everything which could be done to make relations with Erdogan to be not just bad but very bad was done, starting from the administration of President Obama. Practically all American presidents did so. You know, now President Erdogan even refused to accept an American ambassador. It doesn't mean that Turkey will leave NATO or Turkey will start waging war together Russia against the states. Of course, no. Turkey has own interests in Ukraine, in Syria, own interests in Azerbaijan, and everywhere on the post-Soviet territory. But Putin knows how to come to an agreement with anybody, with friends, with allies, with adversaries, enemies. They are partners with Erdogan who respect each other on a number of key projects: nuclear power plant, gas hub, oil hub. Just look, a very good point of view that Turkey is helping Russia with the gas hub. But this was Russia who gave an opportunity to Turkey to become a gas hub. It wouldn't be able to exist. It would never exist in Russia, and Turkey would never be able to play a key role in the future deliveries to Europe if Russia didn't have this position. And Erdogan was dreaming about it, to grab Europe by the throat. That was his old dream. He is working on that. And I don't know whether he will be a president, but America is openly saying that they are against Erdogan. Europe is also against Erdogan, but Russia doesn't say anything. We're just trying to stay away from that. We do not go into this business. And the saying in Syria has Iran, Turkey, and Russia within Astana process. America is not there, Europe is not there, and there will be no United Nations organization. We are neighbors, and we decide there what will happen there. This is a very simple. This will help Tehran and Ankara, and it will help Moscow and, of course, Damascus. We can quarrel, we can argue, we can dislike each other, but we are here to decide the situation, and no external players will play here on our controversies. This is a very simple recipe, you know. 2,000 years ago, Patriarch Kirill II, I'm Jew, and let me also refer to that. He said the very good words: don't do to the other that you didn't want to get from the other, right? For yourself. Something like that. This was very wise phrase. Don't try to make good to him as you believe he should feel. This is what America does when they promote democracy, multi-gender agenda, human rights in the American understanding. Just don't make anybody be not like you. This Russia do now. No one of our far or near neighbors we force to be someone they don't want to be. And this works, really. This is an old Bible wisdom, 2,000 years. Putin is not Jew, but he knows the sources, the origins very well. It's very easy. You can read Bible and you can find everything there.
That's true. Do unto others as you would want done unto yourself. Classic biblical phrase and concept, the golden rule, I think we call it. Let's talk about another nation again in the Syrian context, in the Russian context, and that's Iran. You brought up the Astana process and the relationship, the diplomatic relationship with Turkey, Iran, Russia, to resolve the Syrian conflict. I can remember back, and looking at the gray in your beard, I think you can remember back as well, when Iranian relations with Russia weren't good, and that Iran looked at Russia or the Soviet Union with distrust because of the Communist Party and things of that nature. And even early on in the Iran involvement in Syria, there was some hesitation on the part of Iran about becoming too close with Russia. But now we look at today, and Iran-Russian relations are, I think, as close as they have ever been in recent history, and they appear to be getting even closer. It goes beyond Syria. It goes into a strategic relationship. It goes into a relationship with the SCO with China. Can you maybe explain, again, to an American audience that might not be normally used to looking at nuance? We like things black and white, good versus evil. But when you take a look at the Russian relationship with Iran, it's very complex. So if you could help us decipher that, that would be very useful. Thank you.
But no, there's everything also very easy. We don't try to make Irans be like not like they are. We don't tell them what power they should have. We can like it, we can not like it. Scott, I'm very westernized person, if you may. I'm a very profane person, mundane person. I don't like those religious regimes and theocracies of ayatollahs, and they are not closer to me than all our friends or relatives who live in America or in Israel. And I have many relatives and friends there. But what is important, we understand that the time when the Soviet Union was changing regimes and was changing lifestyles and governments in different countries did not bring us success, but on the contrary. But now the role of the Soviet Union is played by the United States. They have become a new big Soviet Union which tells everybody you should live like that and you shouldn't live like that. You should have this man on the head in the government of your state and not that man. Well, who came to power. I stress came to power because there are no democracy, no elections in monarchies. And from the point of view of me, 50 years ago, probably I would think that was terrible. But now, currently, I think, why should I say, well, should I tell Arabs how they should rule, they should live? Probably I don't like ayatollahs and dictators, military dictators, but these are their countries and they have to decide on their own how to live. This is a basic approach, and by the way, Chinese have the same basic approach. Probably we took it from China. Not tell anybody that what is bad and what is good in their homes. This brings us closer to Turkey and Iran, to China and to Brazil, with a huge number of all different countries beyond the bloc, which was called democracies by the United States of America. The other thing is that inside this bloc there are some rules of the game. Everything happens there as the Department of State decides, and sometimes I even know what specifically is the person who decides in the White House whether this country will exist on the map or not. What happened to Sudan, and it's split into Southern Sudan and other Sudan. And in this regard, this is a winning strategy. There could be different strategies. There could be a winning strategy or losing strategy. Today, we're not trying to make anybody be different. That's it. And this is very simple. The situation with Ukraine, from my point of view, is an extraordinary one. Because, of course, it was done everything to make us not to make us avoid those military clashes which began. Putin didn't want it at all. But in the situation with Iran, we don't make them be different. They don't make us be different. It's a great choice, I think.
Thank you very much for that. Now, I'm going to bring up a country that, even though it's not listed as part of the Astana process, and oftentimes we don't talk about it, it's there. And I think you know the country I'm getting ready to talk about, and that's Israel. And from the American perspective, our relationship with Israel is very simple, yet very complicated. We, here in the United States, I think it's acknowledged that we are open advocates of Israel. We are proponents of Israel. We support Israel diplomatically, militarily, economically. And Israel has a lot of influence in the United States, a tremendous amount of influence. And yet we see Israel, it's more complicated than that. And I think Russia manifests this complexity in a more thorough fashion. I was in Israel in the 1990s when there was a huge immigration of Jewish people from Ukraine and Russia to Israel, and I saw firsthand the impact that had on Israel's society, injecting a 10% population growth that was foreign to Middle East concepts, and the impact that had on Israeli internal domestic dynamics. Right now, Israel is involved in Syria. Israel bombs Syria on a daily basis. There's Russian troops in Syria. Russia and Israel have, in some cases, appear to nearly come to blows over Syria. But there's also a huge connectivity. As you said, you have relatives who live in Syria, and there are many are in Israel, and there's many Israelis who have relatives back in Russia. This is a family connection that has an impact on everything. Can you explain to the American people, maybe, I know it's complex, but the dynamic of Russian-Israeli relations, what is it? Is it, are you allies? Are you friends? Are you opponents? Are you neighbors? Are you relatives? Are you all of that?
Scott,
I've been dealing with Israel for 40 years, and I was sitting in the Soviet underground doing Israel from the Jewish side. I was from the Jewish side, and I know very well the Jewish America and probably many knows me in the Jewish America. From my point of view, all those words on the topic how America supports Israel, it's very beautiful, very usual, but it has nothing to do with the reality. Given that before 1967 the states didn't pay a lot of attention to Israel, but if America supports Israel only for the sake of America, only in the interests of America, and absolutely not in the interests of Israel. Moreover, the support of Israel from the states is absolutely selfish. It does not take into account to any extent the living interests of Israel, and it places it to the edge of destruction. And I know what I'm speaking about. We've analyzed American-Israel relations from the pre-state period, and in our institute we issued a lot of books on that topic. But it doesn't mean that Americans who support Israel in reality, they really feel they don't feel warm feelings to this country. But very often, the American policy is absolutely opposite to what Israeli establishment would have. And David Ben-Gurion once, in a very harsh way, demanded that American Jews don't intervene in the Israeli policy. We don't intervene in the Israeli policy, that's for sure. But again, we have a different approach. When, if 1.5 million of Jews from America would live in Israel, and they will be on the front, they will war for this, they fight for this country and come to work in this country, and not just come to this country to sign some checks and thinking that this would be enough. Probably in that situation, probably those people would really be able to understand what is and what means support of Israel. Probably yes, but probably no. Look, we have different and difficult relations with Israel as a country. Our country, the Soviet Union, was at the origins of Israel. To the great extent, it was a Soviet project, a project of Stalin. And the Soviet Union recognized Israel as first country. And in the war for independence, the Soviet militaries were fighting. Not many people know about this, but I know those people. Then, after 1967, the relations deteriorated, and before that they were not okay, but our generals were lobbying in our Central Committee of the Communist Party. They lobbied, but short, brief breakup of diplomatic relations for 1 year, they think, after the 6-day war, because they had to demonstrate somehow to the Arabs that we are on their side. The Arab world was big, the Arab world was rich. We, under Brezhnev, we took away Arab countries from the sphere of influence of Great Britain and France, to the lesser extent of the US, but there was a big game between not just Britain or Soviet Union, but between America and the Soviet Union. As a result, it took longer. That period without relations was longer, and it lasted till the late 80s. And in our country, we had a very active and very ramified Jewish underground. The Soviet power didn't like it, and they tried to combat it. There were different people there, people who were fighting for leaving the country, or people who were striving to set up the Jewish culture. I was in command of the self-publishing houses. That was publishing houses who printed all literature about Israel, about Jewish League, about Jewish culture in the Soviet Union. Dozens of thousands of books every year, 11 periodicals. The World Samizdat, self-publishing, was in the English lexicon, and if I was captured, I would go to jail for some 15 years. And proceeding from that, 40 years of my life are related to the normalization of relations between Jerusalem and Moscow. And not only by signing checks, although I did so too, in very big sums, for very big sums. Well, in this regard, we achieved a lot. We have an inter-parliamentary committee for security and defense. We have visa-free relations. The Israelis can come to Russia without visas, and the Russian people don't need visa to Israel. In our institutes, there are departments for Hebrew and Israeli economics and history. I think studying of Israel in Russia is much more broader than in all other world, including the United States. Those institute departments were founded by me personally, and as an international professor, I've been teaching for 25 years at one of these departments. And in Israel, we have more than 1.5 million people who have direct relations to Russia and the Soviet Union. It means that practically everyone in Russia has not relevance but friends for sure in Israel. And this is not a theoretical tie to what extent that you read the Bible and you know that there is a country of Israel. No, the question that your nephew is at the forefront or in the border militaries and every war which happens there, you think whether she would come back home or not. When the missiles flowing over to Israel from Lebanon, well, they are shelling the house of my brother, and they used to have a shell explosion 50 meters away from their home. That was a true story. And it is much more than some talks about relations between America and Israel. I was in Israel more than 100 times. I know this country very well, and I know practically all Israeli leaders for the last 30 years. I know them personally. As for Syria, no, Israel is not involved in the Syrian conflict, no. And thank God for that. The Israel's sphere of interest is security of Dutch heights. When Druzes living on Dutch heights were fighting against Islamists, they tried to protect themselves from Al-Qaeda, and so Druzes, the militaries, the former Israeli militaries, they crossed the border and they helped their relatives. This is a fact. This is reality. And Israeli government didn't protect them from this. Second thing, Israel is absolutely not interested in the fact that Iran, which de facto has a war, not announced, but this is a war, to create on the territory of Syria the second Hezbollah, which would be as dangerous for Israel as Hezbollah in Lebanon. And the platform for bombarding Israel from southern Lebanon should not be created in Syria. And Russia helps in that. We committed ourselves for some 50 to 70 kilometers from Israeli and Syria border. Not theoretical, which counts Dutch hates Syrians. No, in this case, I understand that our Ministry of Foreign Affairs believes Dutch hates belonging to Syria. But me, as Trump, we don't think so. I was there in that region, and the part of those hates which is occupied by Israeli, where Israeli population is Israel, and I don't want to discuss it at all. And they know my point of view in MFA, in the Ministry of Defense. They know my point of view also, and there were no words said, and they don't argue with me. So from the factual border, from the factual boundary, where Assad army and border militaries met each other, 50-70 kilometers should be the zone with no Iranian troops, no troops from Iran at all. And Russia is providing that. Second thing, when in Syria, for example, Damascus airport or Lebanon accepts some goods from Iran, missiles, some military equipment, so dangerous equipment which can help in a future Iran-Israeli war. Israeli planes destroy caravans with those goods, and sometimes they destroy those planes which bring over it to the airports. Despite any Russia-Iranian relations, Russia does nothing to prevent Israel from doing this. And that's it, very simple. Moreover, when Russian planes making flights over Syria accidentally fly over Israeli territory, there's everything very tight, so it can happen. So no one tries to shoot them down, as it was in Turkey when our plane was taken down accidentally when it flew over the Turkish border. And that was very hard incident. As far as I remember, it could have led to a big war, but Erdogan and Putin abstained from that. And there's no such problems with Israel. That's it. There are relations in the security area, in the area of military departments. Minister Shoigu can speak with the Minister of Defense and with the government of Israel, also Patrushev, and Russia is absolutely not interested in making Israel disappear from the map of the Middle East. But not theoretically, but practically. We try not to use Israel in any Russian projects or goals, and the Israeli government appreciates that. As for Ukraine, okay, Israel takes a neutral side here, neutral stance, more to the benefit of Ukraine. The mercenary and volunteers go there to fight against our militaries, and they also deliver some non-lethal weapons, as we call them. Israeli press, which is under complete control of Ukrainian or refugees, Russian oligarchs, has a very hard anti-Russian policy, but since the regime in Ukraine, despite it is headed by ethnical Jews, is absolutely Nazi regime, and the Holocaust in Ukraine was the hardest one, and it was implemented by those people who were heroes now for this current regime. The Russian government does not forget to remind this also to the Israeli government. And then let's see what happens in the future. But this is the real picture.
Well, thank you very much for that. It's an extraordinarily complicated relationship, and we need this kind of insight to help us decipher it. One last topic before we go, and it's one that's on the headlines today, and that's Sudan. You mentioned earlier about the role played by the United States in getting Sudan to be split into Sudan and Southern Sudan. Today, what's left in Sudan, we see some very difficult internal conflicts between the Sudanese military and rapid response forces. Here in the United States, there's a lot of talk about the hidden hand of Russia, that Russia is involved, especially in terms of using Wagner to promote this conflict, to side with the rapid response forces because of greed, some secret relationships with gold smuggling, etc. Can you give us some insight into what Russia's relationship with Sudan is, and does Russia, in fact, have a hidden hand in this conflict?
Look, I'm not a big supporter of the conspiracy theory. It's everything very simple here. When I speak about the role of the states in this split for Sudan and Southern Sudan, I mean those nice ladies who call Afro-American lobby of the State Department, starting from Condi Rice, Susan Wright, and I remember very well their role in the fact that the Southern Sudan, African Sudan, should be split from the Northern Arab Sudan. That was very interesting idea, but they boiled down to Dinko started to kill each other, that the genocide topic appeared for the Southern Sudan at all, and Salva Kiir, its leader, who could be the member of BLM movement, was got under sanctions, because not always when you help people with the politically correct color of their skin, if you help them with their own state, they, instead of building democracy, they would start killing their neighbors of the same color of the skin but from another tribe. This should be taken into account. And this was the first precedent, the first case in the post-colonial era of dividing a state in the Middle and Near East, recognized by the Organization of United Nations. And this experiment was absolutely a failure. It doesn't mean that in that Sudan which stayed, started to live better. Genocide stopped in Kordofan, in Darfur, in other local places. But no, it didn't happen. That was just a different word. It is built based on a Middle Age principle, tribal principle. To discuss here human rights is absolutely useless. To speak about democracy is absolutely silly. Because every time I was really sad and disappointed when I hear about this. For now, Russia doesn't have any hidden hand in this conflict. This is a conflict between General Abdel Fattah, the head of Sudan and head of Sudani militaries, and his deputy, Mr. Mohad Hamdan Daglo, Hamidi, the head of the Rapid Deployment Forces. Just imagine two gangs, one gang and the other gang. Gang number one controls oil. Gang number two controls gold mines. They overthrew the previous government, and after the Omar al-Bashir deposed, who was one of the dictators in Sudan of Arab world, the temporary government came to power, and al-Burhan and Hemeti, they both toppled it. And then they should split the bounty, right? But both of them have own military group. And the conflicts start here between Egypt, which supports al-Burhan, and Emirates, which support Hemeti. And yes, Hemeti has contacts both with Chad and with the Russian Wagner Group and with Libya. He just received from Khalif Haftar significant munition reserves. And what do you want in this situation? And the leader of each gang has own supporters and patrons. And the question of control over Red Sea ports in Sudan. Port Abu Ammama, the Emirates invest around $6 billion, and this is a very decent sum of money. And despite the situation, for example, in Libya, Egypt, Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and Russian Wagner Group are supporting Khalifa Haftar altogether, and in the situation in Sudan, the interests of Emirates and Egypt are different. And in Yemen, Hemeti's people are used by the United Arab Emirates as field militia locally. They have old military relations. This is a big bunch of different problems. The big problem is that in the south of Sudan, the war used to be all the time, but Khartoum, which is being attacked now by al-Burhan's troops, was never under military strikes, and there's a huge amount of civilians sitting homes without electricity, food and water. And that was just the first case when they faced real war. This situation with refugees for more than 20,000 people flew over Chad border, and most probably this conflict will impact Chad and probably Libya. Look, what Americans will do there, we should ask our good old friend Bill Burns. He is the director of the Central Intelligence Office, and I used to be in good relations with him when he used to work as the American ambassador in the Russian Federation. And at that time, it seemed that our countries can act as partners and probably as friends. Now it's not like that. We understand, but okay, what can we do? I was probably mistaken. Well, the American interests in Sudan can be described more by the CIA director, if he would be willing to. As for the Russian interests, in terms of the state, they are not pronounced. We try not to get involved as a state in all those quarrels and fights where we shouldn't be involving. As for the Wagner Group and Wagner troops, this is a separate private military enterprise. They have, once again, relations with one of the conflict party, but they are not involved in this war. This is an internal Sudani war, and the separate topic is why Hemeti groups should have been integrated in the Sudan army for 2 years, and al-Burhan believed that for 2 years he will be able to take it under control. Hemeti demanded 10 years, but when you have 10 years of absolute lack of control, it's much better than only 2 years, okay? But as a result, they didn't come to an agreement and started to fight. But this is Africa. That's how we see it.
Well, thank you very much for that, and thank you very much for this wonderful tour de force of the Middle East and providing insight into Russia. I appreciate your time, and I think everybody who watched today got a treat. That was Professor Evgeny Satanovsky, Director of the Middle East Institute, and an orientalist who I think this was extremely valuable for anybody who was able to watch. And I thank everybody. I think, once again, this show has lived up to something I believe in very strongly, and that is to empower yourself with knowledge and information. Knowledge is power, and you have empowered yourself by tuning in today. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you the next time.